Welcome to this video. Now let's continue on the weather forecast controller right here and let's turn it into our flight controller. Simply select the weather forecast controller here, right click on it and hit rename. Now let's rename it to flight controller. You can see by doing that, we automatically refactor any reference that we can find here. Let's hit apply. You can also see that the C# file name got adjusted. Now previously we were able to get to that controller by writing down localhost/weather forecast. Now since we used that route attribute, he will now see, okay, name of the controller, which is flight controller. And as I said, the controller suffix gets removed. So we will come to that route by localhost port/flight. So now let's start the application. And in addition to that, I want to show you something else. So, when we have that Angular project and that ASP project, it is like we start the application right here, ASP.NET Core gets started, a proxy gets set up, and we will get redirected to the Angular project once we enter URLs. So right now you can see that launching the SPA single page application proxy. Check that we now have localhost 7280. Let's copy that. And here you can see localhost 44492. This is just for me, right? For you it could be different, but there are two ports. So our ASP.NET Core application is running on 7280, and now the Angular proxy gets set up, and then we will always get redirected to the Angular application, which is running on 44492. You can see that right now here. So since we are just developing in our ASP.NET Core project right now, and we just want to test something on the controller, we can now go ahead and write down here flight, and which will actually tries to redirect us. But in the console, when we open it up with Ctrl+Shift+J in Chrome, you can see that the URL is missing in Angular. That's totally fine, that's correct. We just need to go ahead and paste here localhost 7280. This is for me, right? This was the ASP port, and then go ahead and write down /flight. And now you will be able to see the JSON information. So later on we will for sure add a route at Angular too, so that everything is connected again. But you need to know that there are two ports, one for ASP and one for Angular. And the proxy is the system which automatically redirects us from the ASP program to the Angular project. Now I want to show you where you can find that ports. Inside of the project, on the right side, you can find a folder called properties. And inside there you can find the so-called launch settings. So open that file up, it's in JSON format written. Now here you can see the application URL and its port 7280, right? So this is the ASP port. So if you want to know any of your port information for ASP, you can go ahead and check it right here. Also, you can configure different profiles. For example, when you later want to deploy your application, you can set up a deployment profile right here, which has additional information like environment variables or other properties. So now in the flight controller, we will get that random information here about weather forecast. We don't really need that. So let's first of all get ahead and remove that summary here. This is really not needed. And inside of our get right here, we can remove weather forecast. Let's simply delete that file. So inside of the project view on the right side, scroll to the very bottom and you can find weatherforecast.cs. Let's delete that file. Now let's switch back to the flight controller. Instead of using that custom type weather forecast, let's simply for now go ahead with string. So IEnumerable string. So instead of returning that weather forecast stuff, let's go ahead and delete it. I will delete everything what's inside of that curly braces, and I will also delete the curly braces. So let's go ahead and here in get, let's rename that get method into search, because it's for searching flights later on. Keep in mind that the attribute here is still HTTP GET. So this method is getting called when we send an HTTP GET request to the search endpoint. Now let's return a simple string array. New string array, and we can add 3 test elements. American Airlines. You can add any of those you know. British Airways. There we go. Now this is a, well, relatively new approach on how you can write simple methods without curly braces. So if you, for example, have a single line of code like this would be, right? We could all write it in one line of code. You can go ahead and write it that way, for example. Now let's save it here. Let's start our application one more time. I've already added the /flight endpoint on our ASP.NET Core port. So now you can see American Airlines, Deutsche BA and British Airways. Great. So our search endpoint right here is configured as an HTTP GET method. And the name of the endpoint is search. And once we enter that URL, right, flight here as controller, flight/search, we will call this right here. We will get this string array as result, and it will get converted from string array into a JSON object, which we can then see in the browser. Now, our main goal finally is to take that JSON response here, which will get created from that string array, right? So just imagine we have that string array converted into JSON format, and we will need to get that JSON format into our Angular application and then render the front end. So like our flight search cards, depending on the information. So if we have those three informations here, our Angular project will request it once we hit the search button in our front end, and we will get that information and it will get sent back to our Angular project, and then using that information we can show some real data. Now we need to make some adjustments, right? Because in Angular we don't have that simple strings anymore. We have created interfaces for more complex data models. So we need to do that here too. Let's proceed and build some more interesting flight data.